Why is it that every new round of peace talks on Ukraine feels more like a performance than a real path to resolution? With each meeting, it becomes increasingly clear the parties aren't really negotiating peace. They're negotiating positioning, influence, and face-saving narratives ahead of what might become a long-term global reshuffle. The latest developments around the April 23rd meeting in London only reinforce that impression. Officially, it all sounds promising. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, along with Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Keith Kellogg, is scheduled to meet with representatives from the UK, France, Germany, and Ukraine. The agenda: a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Framed as a continuation of the Paris talks, where the US already laid out its proposed terms for ending hostilities. But behind the carefully worded diplomacy lies a much tougher geopolitical reality. For the first time in many months, Russia and the US are speaking about a potential freeze in terms that used to be off the table. According to Bloomberg, Washington is floating a plan that effectively recognizes Russia's control over occupied territories, including Crimea, Donbass, and parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Not official recognition, but de facto acceptance. In return, Ukraine would abandon its pursuit of NATO membership. And that's where political contradictions start piling up. President Zelensky publicly insists on an unconditional ceasefire, but with the usual caveat: no territorial concessions. In reality, Kyiv finds itself in a tight corner. The US, which just months ago was sending weapons and championing Ukraine's fight, now openly suggests it may walk away from the process if progress isn't made in the coming days. Trump has made his position unmistakably clear. We'll step back if there's no deal. And this time, it doesn't sound like a bluff. Meanwhile, Moscow is signaling a willingness to resume direct talks with Kyiv, for the first time since the early days of the war. Putin has stated Russia is open to dialogue and has always viewed peace initiatives positively. In a more concrete gesture, the Kremlin proposed halting strikes on civilian infrastructure, provided Ukraine agrees to reciprocate. That's a significant shift. Russia is ready to pause, but only on its terms. Zelensky hasn't responded directly. Instead, he reiterated that Ukraine is open to any form of dialogue regarding the protection of civilian infrastructure. It's a diplomatic dance, both sides signaling readiness while avoiding any firm commitments. It's as if everyone is circling the idea of compromise without daring to say the word out loud. Behind closed doors, though, the negotiations are more advanced than they seem. Sources in the US administration confirm that Washington is seriously considering a scenario where Russia retains control of key territories and Ukraine is granted security guarantees. One proposal reportedly involves European peacekeepers overseeing a ceasefire, monitored by a joint commission of Ukrainian, Russian, and neutral representatives, possibly from a non-NATO state. In short, an attempt to formalize the status quo under the guise of a transitional phase. Equally notable is the US willingness to discuss sanctions relief as part of the package, a major shift from earlier hardline positions. While this will undoubtedly spark tensions in Eastern Europe, Washington appears willing to risk it in order to bring the war to a close with minimal cost, both financially and reputationally. The paradox grows. Western leaders still publicly speak of defending Ukraine's sovereignty, while privately looking for off-ramps that involve giving up significant ground. Trump has said he hopes for a breakthrough this week and that he will present the final version of the peace plan within 3 days. Leaks suggest this will include both territorial concessions and Ukraine's formal neutrality. Perhaps most telling is the change in American rhetoric. Where officials once spoke of defending democracy and never yielding to aggression, they now say things like, "We're not saying Ukraine gives up territory forever. We're acknowledging the current reality." That's not just a semantic shift, it's a diplomatic reset. Zelensky's tone is also evolving. In a recent address, he stated, "Our army will respond in kind to a ceasefire, with a ceasefire, to attacks, with our attacks." Kyiv is reserving the right to resume hostilities at any moment, and that might be wearing thin in Western capitals that are increasingly weary of open-ended commitments. Meanwhile, drone strikes have resumed in Odessa, and both sides accuse each other of violating the Easter truce. It's difficult to verify facts on the ground, but one thing is clear: While politicians are still talking, the war continues, albeit more quietly. What we're witnessing isn't the beginning of peace, but the final round of a geopolitical bargaining session. The US is pushing for a frozen conflict, Russia wants its gains legitimized, and Ukraine is trying to save face without making formal concessions. None of the contradictions have disappeared, but everyone seems tired. Tired enough to consider an imperfect solution just to get this over with. If the coming days don't deliver a tangible outcome, we may be entering a phase of strategic waiting, where all sides pause, not because they've found peace, but because they've run out of better options.